the social media thing, people popping up. Oh, I've got this place in Bali and there's my place in Australia and I just travel the world and block out time in my Airbnbs. At the end of the day, the buck always stops with you. Hey guys, and welcome back to another episode of the Airbnb Nomads podcast. And on this week's Property Education Masterclass, we're joined by the SA expert himself, Mr. Tommy Gann. Now, Tommy tells us his whole story from leaving his corporate background, very, very smart guy, worked as a pharmacist, but realizing that not only was his pay not going up, it was actually going down the longer that he stayed in that business. So he decided to transition out, realizing that he needed more financial security for himself and his family, and moved into the serviced accommodation space. Fast forward a good few years, Tommy now knows the absolute ins and outs of the serviced accommodation game, but more of the detailed stuff as well, the important stuff, the business stuff, the legislation stuff. This is where Tommy really strives. And this is the stuff that most people in serviced accommodation don't know, that isn't taught, that the training companies aren't telling you. So this episode is worth listening to every single piece right till the end. There's lots of really cool nuggets in this one. Guys, as always, if you get knowledge from this episode, if this knowledge inspires you, if this episode helps you to grow, please follow the show, leave a review. It helps us more than I can possibly say. Also, if you've got any questions around service accommodation or the property world, pop that question in the review. We'll pull you out and read that answer out on the show. Until then, guys, settle in, get comfortable. This is a great episode. I can't wait for you to hear it. Here we go. Hey, Tommy, welcome, mate. Thanks so much for coming on the podcast.
Thanks, Alex. Yeah, nice to meet you.
Really, really good to have you on. We've been chatting for a little bit, going back and forth, trying to get this thing going. So really, really appreciate you taking the time. And obviously it's the red day. For those of you who can't see us, we're both top to tail in red. So yeah, making the extra effort today. But Tommy, the reason that I wanted to have you on, the reason that I reached out to you in the first place, is that I've seen a lot of the stuff that you're very active on the socials, you're very active in the property groups, and sometimes you see people who write stuff that just kind of stands out, right? It's a little bit more in depth. It's a lot more involved. It's a lot more complex, and it kind of sits outside of the usual one sentence, one word answers that most people kind of bring to the groups. And it's very obvious that you've got a huge wealth of experience in the serviced accommodation space. So it was just a no-brainer to have you on. So yeah, really, really appreciate your time. I know a little bit about your backstory. I'd like to start there because you weren't always in serviced accommodation. So take us back just a little bit to what you was doing before you started in the world of SA.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks for having me on. It's been nice chatting with you back and forth as well. So yeah, I really appreciate getting to know you a bit better. So my history before service accommodation, qualified as a pharmacist, 2010. 4 years training, then did pharmacy for a good number of years. It was very enjoyable at the beginning. I knew all the patients first name basis when they came in. I knew what medication they were on. If there was any changes to the medication, it was very easy for me to counsel them on that and the interactions. But after a while, it wasn't the type of industry that I thought I'd signed up for. I thought I had got a professional degree and I'd always have a professional kind of job. But I was on a pay freeze for the first 4 years. And then there was people coming in working the day, they're called locums, and they were earning more than what I was earning per hour. So, as an indication, I was on £19 an hour, graduate starting salary. And I was still on that 4 years later, despite all the experience. And
not a single pay rise in 4 years?
Not a single pay rise in 4 years, yeah. So basically, when I first joined the company, it was owned by a company called Shura. And then 6 months later, it got bought out by another multiple. And then basically the new multiple, or my new employer, said that you're being paid higher than what our pharmacists are being paid. So we can't give you a pay rise. So, okay, fair enough. One year's, 2 years passed, everything else is going up, and my pay wasn't. So I thought, okay, well, this doesn't make sense. The other pharmacists are getting £24 an hour just to come in and work the day. So I thought this isn't right. I might as well just quit and locum for them. So that's exactly what I did for the next 2 years. Um, you know, quit my employed position, worked for the same pharmacy, same hours, got paid £24 an hour, and there was no tie-in for hours. If I wanted to have a day off, I'd just not book a shift. So it was very good for those extra 2 years, but the the industry took a big dive. And when I left, around about 2016, it was at £17 an hour. So it was even less than my graduate
Wow.
starting salary. Yeah.
So after
So I
all
thought,
that time and all those years and all that work, you was going backwards in pay. That's
yeah,
crazy.
yeah. And for a bit more context, my uncle is a pharmacist, and he was saying back in his day when he qualified, the locum rates were £45 an hour, and they'd pay you from the moment that you left your house. So say if you had to travel 2 hours to get to work, they'd pay you from the moment you left your door, £45 an hour.
Unreal. So you must have been tearing your hair out.
Yeah, I was thinking, drop down to 17. Where is this going to bottom out? There's more and more pharmacists going into the supply chain.
But what doesn't
I
make
don't
sense
know.
about it is that, and I've got a perception, maybe it's not accurate, but I've got a perception of pharmacists being very intelligent. They've studied for a long time. It's gone through all of the work to get there. But then you get there and you're not getting anywhere near the reward for all that work.
Yeah, yeah. It's frustrating. Um, and yeah, I realized I needed to do something quick
Mm.
anyway. Um,
Was it always
I,
something was that always your passion? Was you passionate about that because of did you say your uncle was a pharmacist? Is it a family?
yeah, I've got quite a few families, like both sides, my dad's side, my mum's side. I've got family that are in pharmacy. Um, so I was very good at sciences and maths. And in terms of professional work, I thought pharmacy was just a good fit, and I did very
Mm.
well
What about having
going
your own
into it.
pharmacy? Was that an option? Can you have your own pharmacy, or
You
is that
can,
not how
yeah.
it
So
works? Mm.
it was an option to look into, but it's very difficult to start pharmacies now. There's already enough pharmacies, so the only way to get in is to buy out someone else. So someone that's retiring, and you buy them out for a multiple of whatever their turnover is. Um, Obviously, it requires a lot of funds, upfront funds.
And then how does it? I don't want to get stuck in the weeds too much about pharmacists and how they work, but I'm just
Yeah.
curious how does it work? So if you own a pharmacist, do you just buy the medicines and then sell them for a profit, or is it like a brewery style where they get a percentage and
It's quite a complex thing. So there's different types of medicines, and depending on the category, you get reimbursed differently. But typically, you get a set fee per item dispensed. So, it could be 20p or something like that per item dispensed. And then for certain medicines, you would get a markup. Um, Things like specials that need to be specifically made, then you would get a percentage, a larger percentage plus handling fee, shipping fee, and stuff like that. But it's all about volume. Generally, it's about volume. It's about procedure, processes, but the pharmacy has to pay up all of this medication up front and then reclaim it back. Um,
mm,
so it's if you don't have your processes in place, you could actually end up losing quite a lot of money.
mm,
It's not guaranteed.
absolutely. Well, I
Yeah.
can tell that you're definitely a processes guy by some of the stuff I've seen you write on Facebook. So obviously I don't need to ask you why you decided to get out of the business. It was obviously tanking, and man, I definitely yeah feel a bit sorry for the guys that are kind of in that position now. After putting in all that hard work, because it can't have been an easy decision after putting in all that time and the work and the financial commitment to get into that point to make the decision to walk away. Was that Was that quite tough, or were you just kind of burnt out and ready?
Yeah, a mixture of both. Like I said, when I first started pharmacy, it was very enjoyable. When I qualified, it was a well-supported industry. I had dispensers, I had support staff, counter staff. Towards the end, a lot of pharmacist hours was cut. So, instead of doubling up, because I worked in a very busy pharmacy, it was one of the top 10 busiest pharmacies in the UK. Um, most pharmacies do between 3 and 5,000 items a month. We were doing close to 30,000 items a month. So it was massively busy. We had 3 pharmacists on shifts every day. And towards the end, it was kind of one and a half pharmacists. So we had cut down the pharmacist hours by about half. The support team was down by about half, and we were doing more items than ever before. So, it was a very stretched, um, the resources were just massively stretched. Mistakes were happening. Obviously, when things are under pressure, then mistakes start to happen. There was a few times where I gave out errors in the medication. So fortunately, there was no serious incidences, but it was just a huge wake-up call that I was under too much pressure
Yeah,
to do my job, and I couldn't do it properly. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, absolutely.
So
So what happened after that, mate? You know that you got to move on. You haven't done any property stuff up until this point. Completely polar opposite direction in life. Corporate. You know, pharmaceutical stuff. How does this? Where's the transition begin? How did you kind of stumble into the property world?
sure. So it wasn't a completely new transition. Before I started uni, I actually went on a 3-day course. It used to be by a company called Tigrant, Rich Dad Poor Dad company.
Yeah,
So I went on a 3-day discovery kind of event with them, learned about all the different types of strategies, HMOs, buy-to-lets, service accommodation. But then obviously I started uni and I didn't really think anything more of it. And then fast forward to 2016 is when I went to another one of these courses. It just popped up on my Facebook, and I thought, oh yeah, I'll sign up to that. That looks interesting. And then I went on it. It was pretty much the same 3-day course,
mm.
only this time I was in a further position and I was in a bit more pain with a full-time job. And I was thinking, I really have just been wasting my life with it because I've been very comfortable in my professional job. I was thinking, yeah, it's quite good. I can work part-time hours and still get paid quite a decent salary. Um, and that really just made me think, I'm just wasting my life in this profession and it's not going anywhere. It's just going downhill. So um, I
In
basically
in
gave
in
no,
hindsight, in hindsight, Tommy, with the whole university thing,
yeah,
um, I didn't go to university. I just kind of left school and went into the workplace, and then you know ended up doing a bunch of other things. But how do you feel? I'm not someone to jump all over university, but I'm
hmm
also not someone to really say that you should go to university. I think it depends on who you are, but I do know that there's a lot of kids now that are racking up huge amounts of debt, and they're working in Costa Coffee or McDonald's, and not really putting that to work or able to really benefit from that degree, because it seems like everybody has a degree nowadays. So what do you think? What would your advice be to younger people who are trying to decide, should I go straight down the entrepreneurial route? I feel like that's where I want to go, but maybe my parents and society are telling me that I need to go and get this degree to have that safety net to fall back on. What's your thoughts around that?
um, I guess now that degrees are more common, it's maybe diluted the offering. Also with student debt and the cost of university being so high, it is definitely something to seriously consider. The pros and cons, the cost benefit ratio. Um, I think my university period, I was the last period to really get low cost tuition. So I think it cost me £3,000 a year or something like that. Currently, I think it's far more than that. I don't know what the latest is, but if you're doing 3 to 5 years of study, it's a long time, and there are easier ways, I think, and lower cost ways to be able to develop a very specific skill set that is going to allow you to earn a lot of money. Certainly marketing these days, and there's AI possibilities. You can learn a lot of things without going to university.
I do feel like it's changing because of that. There's so many opportunities now online, especially if you're a young person and your brain, if you've been brought up in that world, if you can exploit all of these, there's kids now, as we know, making millions at 16, 17 years old. They haven't done any kind of schooling, but they just understand that world. So I do see it changing as things kind of develop online. Do you feel like what you did in all of those years of study, has that contributed at all to, owning a successful business today? Is there any attributes that you've taken that have helped you in where you are today in your day to day?
Yeah, massively. I think it wasn't just the university, but everything leading up to that. I think every challenge, every opportunity presents itself as a learning opportunity. I think I've had a very good work ethic instilled into me from a young age. Did the paper round, had multiple part-time jobs even during university, and then going to university and being self-sufficient and cooking and getting along with other people in student halls. It's invaluable, but you could learn all of these skills not necessarily from university. Even if you were to move out, live in a HMO or something like that, share accommodation with other people, you'll pick up similar skills.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you must learn a lot of good social skills at uni, living in the halls and stuff. Yeah, that's a really good point. And I think, I don't know about what other people think, but I think that having good social skills and being personable and holding conversation and stuff like that is almost more valuable than any kind of academic qualifications. Just being able to read a room and be able to build relationships is whatever business you're in. That's got to be the number one skill. So that is absolutely vital. So okay, so you went back, you did the same 3-day course. This time you're a lot more open to the opportunities. The pharmacy thing isn't working out. What happens next?
Yeah, so I didn't know what strategy I was going to do. I was looking into HMOs, very new at this point, very open to any direction. I happened to meet up with some old friends. They actually owned a letting agents at that point. They've been going for about 5 years. So we reconnected. They just said, come into the office, we'll have a chat, see what you could do in the business.
Was that just a coincidence, or did you
just a
manipulate
coincidence.
that because of the
No,
transition?
we just had a networking event, and we both attended at the same time, and we just reconnected. I've not seen him for a long time. And then we just caught up, and they said, "Oh yeah, we're in real estate now. If you fancy, if that's what you're looking to do, then just come in." So I went in, had a look at.
Isn't that interesting how that happened?
Yeah.
I wonder if that is kind of, I don't know, just someone up there kind of controlling things, because
Absolutely.
these things just happen. You don't really think about it, but it's strange, really, when you work out what are the odds of just being in a room with those people again
Yeah,
at that
yeah.
time.
I think that's reflected quite often in life, where you think one door closes and then the opportunity and doors open for somewhere else. And you have to close these doors in order for the other doors to open. And I think that was one of those cases. It wasn't immediate. It was around about 6 months in, after I left. So I was kind of already eating into savings. And then we met up with my friends, and it was at that point I looked at some of the properties that they had on lettings, and they were just sitting there, weeks and weeks and weeks while everything else was kind of shifting, and you know the prices were just too high. As an example, there was these tiny studios for $750 per month, and
This is in central Manchester.
central Manchester, yeah, just off Oxford Road, and you could get a 2 bedroom for 800 at the time, so it just didn't seem like good value for 750 for these tiny studios. But there was loads of them available. There was probably at least five or six
Why were
available.
they incorrectly priced? Was that just error by
Um,
the
yeah, it was a
agent?
very complex issue. So these were sold off plan with a
Mm.
guaranteed rental. So obviously the agents who were guaranteeing the rent wanted to maintain that high income. Otherwise, they'll start dropping the rates for that area. So in order to maintain it, they wouldn't accept anything less than 750. But obviously, it was coming out of their margin, so they'd
Mm.
sold these with a margin on top built in, so they could effectively afford to hold that price. Um, but obviously, it just eats into the profit, and if they could get anything back, that would be great. Um, this is when I looked at the numbers. I did the numbers for Airbnb, which was quite a new thing at the time, and I figured I could probably get about, you know, at least 1,300 per month, and then obviously take off utilities. These were all fully furnished as well. They were ready to go. There was hardly anything needed, just soft furnishings, cushions, knives and forks and stuff like
Mm.
that, bit of bedding, but generally all the furniture was there. So startup cost was very low. It was around about £500 per property. So I said to my friends, it's going to cost about £500 to set this up, and then we could put it on Airbnb, and then it'd probably make a good 500 so a month profit after all expenses. They said, okay, it's a good idea, but we're just full on. We've got no time to take on anything else. But if you want to do this, you guarantee the rent. We'll sort out the contracts with the owners. We'll put in a good word, and then we'll see where it goes. So we started off with 3 units, and then by 6 months' time, we had 20. So these were all in rent to rent. Just as I kind of did the numbers on, we were getting about £500 net profit on each one.
So in 3 months, you added 17 units to your portfolio?
Uh, Within the 6 months, we had 20. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
And that was all within that same block, was it?
Same block. Yeah. And there was other operators in the block. There was another operator that already had 20 at the time, and we kind of matched them within 6 months. Yeah.
So you had 20 deals all on rent to rent.
All on rent to rent. Yeah.
Wow.
All on ASTs as well. So this is where when I got to 20 and we had the money coming in, I invested in a course. So we went on training. We paid a couple of thousand for service accommodation training, because I figured, I need to learn about what I'm doing here, and I definitely learned a lot. I've been on this training. A lot of other people have been in the training, and they said, "Oh, it's not worth it." They've not come out with it. I think when you go on training, it really depends on the person. Um, Firstly, is the information useful, and does the person actually implement it? So in my case, I was already somewhat established. Already had 20 units. Already went through a lot of the pain points that people experience. That start from new haven't experienced. So when I got introduced to all of these concepts, these processes, and I was thinking, oh bloody hell! If I'd known this earlier, life would have been so much easier. But obviously, hindsight's 2020, and all I could do really was review what I'd done, and I made the decision that that business wasn't viable. So took it apart again, started from scratch.
If you love to travel like me and you understand the power in escaping the money for time exchange trap, but you just don't know how to do it, then building an Airbnb consultancy business could be exactly what you have been looking for. Right now in the UK, there is a completely untapped opportunity through helping struggling Airbnb hosts by turning around their underperforming properties and generating you huge commission payments in the process. We are going to teach you all of the tools and all of the techniques that we've learned over the last 5 years through building our very own multiple six-figure Airbnb business, arming you with everything that you need to swoop in and save the day. Minimal startup costs, zero risk, and almost unlimited potential. Sound good? Welcome to the Airbnb Consultant. Contact us through any of the channels included in the studio notes to get the conversation started. What were some of the things, Tommy, that you were missing in that initial business?
Uh, Business structure was one of them. I realised that on the rent to rent model, I could basically hit VAT, and it could potentially be the end of that business.
Hmm.
I couldn't really see a way around it, and I've done lots of research since then, and I still think that rent to rent, it does have a ceiling, the way that most people run it.
Yeah, you must have been well into the VAT threshold with 20.
Yeah, I mean, we started winding that down. We stopped business at 6 months. Kind of the next 12 months after that was winding down the business. We pretty much lost everything that we gained as a profit,
Hmm.
over the
How
next
was
12 months.
how were your friends in the letting agency when you wanted to start winding things down quite early on? How did that
Um,
relationship, how was it affected?
yeah, it was affected. So with the letting agents, we did a 50-50 split. So we formed a company to do this venture, and I had a friend at the time that was helping me do the setup. We would go to IKEA, buy the furniture, buy the bedding and cutlery and spoons and stuff to do the setup. So, I partnered with him as well. So me and him had 50%. The friends at the lettings agent had 50%, and that was working fine until we had 20 units and we had to talk about deep issues like VAT, scaling, future of the business. So one of the partners, I won't say who, but they had the intention of, they were thinking we need to grab market share because we're early onto this. Other people are already doing it. They've got 20 units, we've got 20 units, we need to get more than them. And they were looking at the perspective that we were getting net profit every month, so we just need to keep growing it. I was of train of thought that now that we've got to 20 units, we're starting to lose control of the business, like the operations, the cleaning, all of these problems started to compound, and we had guests turn up to properties that weren't clean, because obviously
Hmm.
we weren't vigilant enough on the processes. So I thought we should just step back, maintain what we've got, um, and make sure that we're growing on solid ground. And we couldn't come to an agreement in the end, so that was another main reason to go our separate ways and wind it down.
It's such a great point, Tommy, and we see this all the time, and obviously you do as well. People bragging and shouting about how many units they've got, and like it's this big thing, and it looks great on social media, and people who are just starting out kind of pedestalize or idolize people that have got 200, 300, 1,000 units, but I don't know. I guess it's what do you want? We're me and Pooh. We're very kind of the idea that for us personally, we kind of keep it small, make sure that it's really well run, really well managed, really well systemized, and as long as it's giving you the lifestyle that you need, really, because once you start going to crazy heights, the overheads get bigger. The you need more people, you need storage, you need all of these things, and it can just kind of go out of control. So, I guess there's different ways of looking at it. But yeah, 100%. And I would just say to anybody out there who's looking at getting into serviced accommodation to, take on board what Tom is saying there. It's not necessarily all about becoming the biggest player in town. It's about having a portfolio or a business that's structured really well and works really well, that then serves you for what you need. You don't really need to follow what other people are doing all the time. So yeah, really, really good point. So you had some kind of clashings of heads, and you realised that this wasn't for you anymore.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, you know, both me and the business partners were all very driven, but obviously our core values were very different. So, that was something that it was a big learning curve for myself. And I've always been very careful to go into business after that, because it's so easy to go into business with people you think share some values. Obviously, we all wanted to make money, but that was not enough of a core value. I think ultimately to keep us together, and I think that's very important. For people to look at before they go into JVs, because when everything's going smoothly, it's great. But when there's disagreements and it becomes very difficult, and those joint venture agreements, very, very difficult to cover every eventuality.
Yeah.
So ultimately, you're working with people that you trust, and you hope that there's going to be some shared core values that you can move forward from. And even if you need to break apart or split off, then you can do that amicably.
Yeah, absolutely. And I also think as well, it's worth touching on when you're talking about JV partners, it's good to work with someone that kind of, brings to the table what you don't have, right? And it sounds like you're the kind of person who's very, and probably because of your background as well, very analytical. You need to understand everything. Everything needs to work and make sense. And if it doesn't, you can see that and you can avoid any problems. And it's good if you're the opposite. If you're just kind of a, gun ho, I've got this dream, got this vision, I'm just going to bull in a china shop. It's good to work with someone like you because, that kind of levels things out, right? And that can kind of create a really good business as well. So I think it's good. I'm a fan of working with people that complement your opposites, so something to consider as well. So yeah, so you wind it all down, and what comes after that?
Yeah, so wound that side down. It took the best part of 12 months. Um, another factor that was part of us leaving that building was there's only one lift in that building, and we had properties all the way up to the 8th floor. So when guests checked in, I was super host at the very early start, and we maintained that until the lift went down. But obviously, we had a lot of forward bookings, people turning up to the building with no lift, and we had to carry the luggages, the suitcases, all the way up to the 8th when they checked in, and then when they checked out, we'd have to come back and meet them and take it back down. So obviously that eats into margin, eats into costs, hit our reviews massively.
Yeah.
I think my rating went down from 4.9 to around about 4.4, and it took about 3 years to recover to go back to a decent score and be able to. I think I've only got Superhost again in this very last review period. It's
Right.
taken that many years to get back up.
Congratulations, back on top.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, so I started off fresh again. Did rent to rent until kind of COVID, but like you said, I didn't want to scale too big. I kept very small, rather than have a big team of cleaners, big team of staff, which we did. Everything was outsourced. It was just a one man team. Everything was outsourced. Cleaners outsourced, and that was very profitable. I was looking at profit margin rather than just turnover. And I think there's a saying that turnover is vanity, and then net profit is sanity, right? So
Yeah,
that's what I was
absolutely.
looking at. And since then, I've very closely looked at margin, and I think margin's massively important. You don't want to be working so hard just to pay everyone else, to pay the cleaners, to pay the accountants, to pay the tax man. What's actually left for you is, and how much time are you putting in to earn that is what I look at.
Yeah, yeah. What does it work out? What does your hourly rate become? What's
Yeah.
left at the end of it? Because there is a hell of a lot going out at the end of the day in the rent to rent business. Um, I want to talk about your thoughts on the rent to rent business, Tommy, because it's getting really busy, right? And we
Mm.
speak about it a lot. Um, there's so many people getting into the space. There's so many big training schools, and then outside of the big training schools, you've got hundreds of individual coaches and mentors that are all pushing rent to rent. And I personally think that there is a ceiling, and obviously the trainers in the big schools, they won't say that because they want to just keep selling the courses. But there's
Right.
only so many people that can keep walking out and taking on rent to rents and putting them on the OTAs and hoping that they're going to make money, right? So how do you feel about the space and saturation points around rent to rent? What do you think the risk
Uh,
levels are for new people getting into the space?
I guess when I started, Airbnb was a new thing. Rent to rent was a new thing. Service accommodation, everything was new. So it was very easy to negotiate with landlords at the time because you can give them the guaranteed rent. We just basically advertise it, put it on Airbnb, and would instantly get a margin. It was very easy to do. In today's market, I mean, even before COVID, it was starting to saturate. Before COVID, there was companies in Manchester alone that had like 200 units on Rent to SA. I know that they had multiple units in blocks. Some blocks were almost majority SA. COVID kind of culled a lot of that market. So anything that was not really working, obviously we had huge lockdown periods, and to guarantee rent for that period of time, it just wasn't possible when all the OTAs were closed. A lot of the market was closed. So that really opened up a huge opportunity for people that managed to stay in. So I was operating very lean at that point, and I managed to hang in by the skin of my teeth. And I transitioned to management, um, which is fundamentally a very different model. So you only take a margin and you're far less liable. But obviously, the caveat is you've got to be able to bring the results for the landlords because they're on the hook for everything else. But I think, like you said, the current saturation levels, there's just so many people doing Rent to SA. Like 2021, 2022, massive, massive gap in the market. There was huge demand, very little supply. You could search Manchester, for example, and look for a month booking, and there'd be like 10 listings. So you could almost charge what you wanted, and you'd get it. Fast forward today, if you were to search now what's available for the next month, there's probably at least 200 listings available. Very high quality listings as well. Obviously the people doing in Rent to SA now are putting in massive amounts to furnish it, to decorate it, to really put in an effort to stand out. But that's off raised the bar of the offerings, but there's still far too many properties available. As a booker, you've got a lot of options. And this is talking about main city centre areas, so like Manchester, Birmingham, Leeds. All of these areas typically I'm seeing a lot of saturation. In the outskirts, it's probably not so much, simply because there's just less people doing it. The demand is obviously lower, so there's still maybe some gaps in the market there, but you've got to be looking very selectively and see who your target market is. And most people go for leisure market, and I think that's not where the value is at the moment.
No, no, definitely. I mean, and it's basic economics, right? The more offerings there are, the harder it is to make money, the more competition, and we see it. I'm sure you see it as well. You'll get an inquiry come in, you give your rates, and then they'll come back with a counter offer of almost half. Because they can achieve that, and when you couple that with the economy and cost of living, and everyone's trying to look for a deal, and the rates are definitely coming down. But what do you think about the people that are, getting sold the big dreams in the classroom, and are coming out and dumping 10, 12, 15,000 into a rent to rent deal, and thinking that they're going to, find financial freedom in 6 months or 12 months, like they're being sold?
Yeah, I think they're definitely being misled, and it says something about the trainers, I think. But then on the other side, I think we're all responsible for our own actions.
Mm-hmm.
So if we're being told there is all of this gold at the end of the rainbow, and if you don't do your own diligence, if you don't do your own research, then you can fall for these traps. And it's a bit of a difficult one because you don't have the knowledge really to scrutinize any deals, to
Yeah,
scrutinize the
exactly.
information you're being told. But if you're dropping like tens of thousands of pounds into investment, then you really ought to at least see the investment. And I think some people are so naive that they buy deals from sources, and then they pay for furniture, and they have no idea whether they've never even seen the property, they've never even seen if the furniture's been delivered, and they're far too trusting. So I, I guess people need to be accountable for their own actions. It
Yeah.
is unfortunate that there are people out there taking advantage of this, but this is, since the beginning of the time, there's been snake oil salesmen. So
Yeah.
it's nothing new there.
Yeah. 100%. I do think that the biggest things that seems to be missing is, basic business, how to run a business, because, most people who are going to rent training, um, for most people, they're coming out of a job. They're not coming from other previous businesses. Most people, they're, maybe they're tradespeople that are trying to build a side business, or they're, just an employee, and they're, sick of the job, sick of the boss, and so they're looking for something to build on the side. So they don't necessarily know how to run a business. And I think that a lot of the business fundamentals are missing from a lot of the training. And then I think also alongside of it, now in today's busier market, is all of the marketing, all of the additional marketing that you need to be doing in order to be securing bookings, because just sitting on the OTAs doesn't really work anymore, does it, because of all of that competition. So I think that's where, um, you know if you are looking at doing some training, you really need to be asking those questions, and making sure that that have those additional skills, because I think without those two things, you're going to struggle.
Yeah, 100% agree. Most people haven't come from a business background. So even though I came from pharmacy, I managed the pharmacy for a number of years, managed the staff. I didn't have oversight of all of the financial details. And most people, I guess, just don't have that knowledge. If you've not learned anything about business from school, you don't then have any opportunity to pick that up unless you start your own business. And it's so complex, something as easy as bookkeeping. Most people don't know about bookkeeping. They
Yeah.
don't know how to bookkeep. They don't know how to use accountancy software. They don't know what expenses they can claim. What the VAT levels are. That's just one simple area of business. But then you've got things like marketing. You've got operations. All of these are a different area, massively different area that you normally hire experts for. If you look at a big company, you would have like a finance officer, you would have marketing officer, but in a small business, all the startups, us as the business owners are wearing all of the hats, and we have to cover all of these roles until we get big enough where we can hire in for these positions.
Yeah.
But then also hiring for someone in big companies, you have HR, you've got people that are in the recruitment area.
Yeah.
Again, we're wearing all of these hats, and if we haven't had experience of hiring people, we don't even know what to look for.
Yeah.
So, yeah, massive deficit in the skill sets required for business.
And in a way, this is all of these issues and all of these problems have kind of led to where you are today in your current business, right? Which is managing and also consulting and helping other people that don't have these skills. Is that correct?
Yeah, yeah. So I did managing for a good period of time. Since lockdown happened, I pivoted the business, so we moved towards SA management rather than guaranteed rent. Um, and that was very effective. But obviously, service accommodation is still very time reactive. So I moved away from that when I started a family. But that was I think it's a far better model in terms of
Completely agree.
cash flow, risk, a win-win benefit. So yeah, and then now I obviously leverage my skills. I've got the knowledge, experience, and we speak with scaling operators, SA owners, and just basically educate them on these pitfalls. Much like yourself, we try and save people a lot of the pain of going through it themselves and really shortcutting that learning curve, so they don't have to make the expensive mistakes that we've made along the way.
Tommy, when you transitioned from a rent to rent operator to the management
Yeah,
um, business, how did you? What was your? We've spoken before on other episodes about how people, source their first rent to rent deal and build relationships with agents and connect with landlords, and that's that road. But when
yeah.
you wanted to go down the management road, how did you go about attracting, hosts or struggling hosts or landlords that wanted to switch over to SA? What was your marketing
Uh,
um, plan?
I didn't do any marketing. So I guess when you just focus at doing a very good job and bringing the results, that very easily becomes your marketing. So you could go to a networking event, and even if you've got just a handful of properties, say 5 properties, and and you strike up conversation with people, let them know what you're doing, the results speak for themselves. So I was getting a lot of referrals through word of mouth. So people that I've spoken to at events, landlords that I've worked with or worked for, and they would pass my name around.
Were these mostly existing struggling operators, or were they mostly buy-to-let landlords that were trying to get out of the game?
Um, Mostly new landlords. So they obviously aware of tenant problems. Section 24 was kind of starting around that time. So it was very easy conversations to start up. They were looking at service combination. If they were looking at exiting, then you know they'd have my number and we'd have a talk. And I'd just say, have you considered these things before, just before your exit? And then if they haven't, then I think it was a pretty no brainer for them to carry on and try service combination just before they sold.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And were they all? I mean, what's your thoughts around even when you're managing, kind of keeping the properties close by geographically? Are
Oh,
you
massive, massive.
you're a fan
This
of
is
that? Hmm.
Yeah, this was one of the things that I'd learned. So because I'm based in Manchester, I did Salford, Trafford, Manchester City Centre. So that triangle was really my wheelhouse. That was my patch, and I could pick up anything around that area. Um, after COVID hit, and then I started doing management, I had the opportunity to go in Nottingham. So I had a friend that was a developer. They had some student accommodation, and because of the student market being hit so severely, they reached out to me and said, can you do service accommodation for our units in Nottingham, just manage for it. And so I started doing that. We built up to 17 units, which was no small amount. It's decent size. We had management of maintenance teams there, we had cleaners there. But I ultimately found that even though I had a good amount of units and it was just 2 cities, the resources had to be spread so thin. I might as well have had 2 separate companies. I was running these 2 things separately. So after 11 months, when the student market, when everything opened up again, I just gave those units back and they filled them back up with students. But that was a huge learning point for me that I don't want to expand beyond anywhere like within outside of 30 minutes that I can
Yeah,
travel to. It was just not worth it. If the boiler goes or something like that, or you've got to visit a property for any reason, the time element just meant that you'd be setting yourself back so much.
yeah, we completely agree. And for us, it's 30 minutes as well. We're like, we tell all of our mentees and in our own business, keep things close because and you see again the social media thing, people popping up. Oh, I've got this place in Bali, and there's my place in Australia, and I just travel the world and block out time in my Airbnbs.
Yeah,
Maybe they've found a magic way of doing it, but at the end of the day, yes, you can have teams and you can hire people and all the rest of it, but at the end of the day, the buck always stops with you, and there will be situations, I'm sure you can attest to, where you've got to get there. You've got to get there sometimes when your team can't deal with it. If it's a serious thing, you need to get there. So having properties spread all up and down the UK, it just sounds very chaotic to me, and a whole load of additional stress that you just don't really need.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, there's enough fires
Yeah,
to be fought every day anyway. And if you're far away, if you're like 2 hours away, 4 hours away, just the time element, if you calculate that in time and hourly rate, and you're not going to get a return on that. It just massively eats into any margin that you've got.
yeah,
Um, and I think there's opportunity everywhere on your doorstep. So why would you have to
absolutely,
secure something so far anyway? You're
absolutely.
gonna best where you live. That's where I think the market local knowledge comes into play.
Yeah, yeah, 100% agree. So, based on your expertise and huge amount of knowledge in this space, what are the biggest things that you see that is lacking in the SA space with people's businesses? What are most people missing out on or misunderstanding?
Uh, Probably business rates. I think business rates is a largely misunderstood area. We've got legislation potentially coming in. C5. Um,
Do you think you're going to see that in central Manchester being so busy, or
yeah,
just the,
I think it's going to be everywhere. C5 is going to be national. Um,
so you
I
don't
think that
think it's just going to be in the pinch point tourist hotspots? You think it's going to be just a national?
Yeah, I think it's going to hit everywhere. It's just going to be a blanket across the nation. Um, everything gets everything that's a dedicated unit will transition through to C5. It's going to bypass planning, but anything that's not or cannot prove that they're dedicated, and it's going to go through a formal planning process. I think
Yeah.
it's if you get on there early, it's going to be a lot easier. And then if you miss the boat on that, it's going to be very difficult to get in because I think the gate's closing behind us.
Especially with Labour now in power, they're going to be doing everything they can to bring back more property to
Absolutely.
the residential market.
Yeah.
So yeah, so talk to us a little bit about business rates. What because I completely agree. There is a lot of confusion around it. Um, so what is it that most people are missing or not taking
Uh,
advantage of?
well, I think most people are thinking it's an option. So, they think, okay, well, I can operate on the council tax or business rates, and it's just whatever is most cost effective, and they'll go with that option, which isn't the case. It depends on the nature of the business. What is the pattern of booking? The the truth of it is, if you're eligible for business rates and you meet the criteria, then it's a mandatory that you switch. Um, there's also lots of efficiencies and actually lots of benefits of making that switch, which the government incentivizes people to do. And one of them is small business rates relief. So if the property is rateable value under 12,000 and it's the only one property in that business or entity, so if it's owned in a personal name or if it's owned in a company and that's the first and only property, you can claim small business rates relief. And this is across England. In Wales, it's different. In Scotland, it's different. But in England, we can claim small business rates relief off that first property, and that's a massive advantage for anyone getting into rent to SA, or if they own, the SA property and they're thinking of trying this for the first one. Huge advantage because potentially you're not paying any council tax, and that's added straight onto your margin pretty much. You might need to account for rubbish removal or something like that, but generally there's still quite a positive outcome there.
I also would say on the rubbish removal thing, yes, there's an additional cost, but especially if you've got houses, like we use commercial rubbish companies, and the convenience factor is worth
Yeah,
its weight in gold. I mean,
yeah,
when you've got houses, you basically will end up employing someone literally to just go around and take all the crap out of the bins and put it in the right bins because they won't collect it. If there's That's what we found, and maybe each area is different, but where we are with some of the bigger houses, if you've got one plastic yogurt pot in the paper bin, they just leave it, and then you end up
yeah,
with bins overflowing and rats running around, and the neighbors get pissed off, and so you end up just going around and putting on gloves and sifting through rubbish, thinking this isn't what I signed up for. What the
yeah,
hell's going on?
yeah,
But with the
exactly.
with the with the commercial rubbish, you just have one massive wheelie bin, all the shit goes in one bin, and then they deal with it off-site.
Yeah,
It's fantastic.
yeah.
But I think with the business rates, Tommy, a lot of people are put off by going through the process with a VOA because it is a bit of a nightmare, isn't it?
Yeah, it's quite complex. So obviously, there's different criteria to hit, and it's all on the VOA website. They tell you about it, and the method of valuation is different. So most retail premises is based off square footage, so either internal or gross area. So service accommodation is based off single bed spaces. Um, every area is different. So Manchester, for example, you might be looking at 1,500 or thereabouts per single bed space. Some areas like Nottingham could be like £400. So it's vastly different.
Vastly
So
different.
yeah, and single bed space means like if you've got one single bed, that's going to be one unit, one single bed space. If it's a double bed, it's going to be two single bed spaces. Sofa beds aren't rated, so they would be effectively rated 0 as long as there's other bedrooms in the property. So yeah, for a 2 bedroom in Manchester, you're probably looking at minimum 6,000 rateable value, so that equates to around about a £3,000 per year bill. Council tax in the equivalent, although it's not really comparable because but obviously if you're doing the figures, you want to know what the money is. It's probably around about 2,000, so you're looking at a 50% increase on council tax in Manchester. If you're looking at areas like Nottingham, if it comes in at 400 per single bed space, you're probably looking at paying about 60% of what council tax would be. So versus 150% in Manchester, and different areas have got different amounts. But it's good to know the numbers. If you check what the rateable values are, what the comparables are, and then it gives you a good understanding of what the numbers are before you get into that business.
So is this the kind of stuff that this is what you do now? So you'll sit down, someone will basically come to you and say, look, Tommy, I've got 5 units. I really don't know what the hell I'm doing. Every now and then, every month there's a little bit of money left in the account. That's all I know. The rest of the business is kind of all over the place. And then you'll sit down with them and you just basically just kind of break it all down.
Yeah, that's essentially what it is. I think we all grow at different areas and different stages, and we'll find our strengths. And then the holes in the business will still be, there's going to be a lot of holes in the business. So everyone's hole is going to be in different parts of the business. Business rates is quite commonly across most business, most SA businesses. There's a big hole there, but we would look at all other parts of the business. Are they missing direct bookings? Are they missing tax efficiencies? Processes, cleaners, calendar management. That there's just so many different areas of service accommodation that there's generally some holes that we can find.
Yeah.
And we'll just try and plug those and educate.
Yeah, great. Sounds like a really, really useful service. And you're right. There's so many moving parts, isn't there? And this is our bugbear about the courses, because most people just walk out of the training schools with the knowledge of how to get a unit, make it look nice, and put it on Airbnb or Booking.com. If they really go the extra mile, maybe they'll be on Booking.com as well. And then it's just like sit back and wait for a booking to come in. But there's so much more to it that isn't being taught, and maybe you can't learn all that stuff in a 3-day course. But if you can't pick it up in a 3-day course, and of course you're going to learn some of it on the job, but you should probably also work with someone on an ongoing basis to help fill in those gaps early on. So, because otherwise you can end up building a monster that's got to be unpicked, 12
exactly.
months, 2 years down the road.
Yeah, that was exactly my situation with the rent-to-rents. So, you build a bit of a monster, and it's hugely cash flowing in the early stages, but then you quickly realise that it's a massive liability, and if you don't shut it down, you're going to be probably in a far more detrimental position. I definitely, build the business steady. Obviously, we don't all have that opportunity to do that from the start. But obviously, when you've got the resources, you've got some money coming in, that's the time really to find a mentor, find someone that knows what they're doing, and leverage from their support.
Yeah, because it is easy to get swept along. I see it. I saw a video, someone who's obviously just trying to, sell a course, was saying that, they've just taken on 7 properties in the last 7 days. And you just
Yeah.
think, and other people talking about how they're now turning around, they're taking on deals and turning them around and getting them live within 24 hours, and this is a system I've created, and, blah, blah, blah. And it's all just complete rubbish, but that's the stuff that sells.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it is. I think it's a little bit ridiculous, to be able to turn something around in 24 hours. Even at our peak, we would say to owners, 2 weeks. It probably would take us realistically about 5 to 7 days to get everything in order.
Yeah, yeah. What are your and I'd say, excuse me, I'd say, for anybody out there who's, interested in Tommy's services, definitely to reach out and get some consultancy. But just here, just in a nutshell, what's your kind of go-to additional marketing lessons and consultancy that you give to people? Because that's massive, right? As the space gets busier, you've got to be a lot more creative and educated with your marketing. So what's some of the go-to bits that you recommend outside of sitting on the
Um,
OTAs?
yeah, so outside of sitting on OTAs, one of the big lessons that I learned was not to over rely on the OTAs. So prior to lockdown, probably 80% of my business was on Airbnb. I didn't use Booking.com, and today I still don't use Booking.com.
They're a nightmare.
But
Yeah, I
had,
don't blame you.
yeah, that's awful. But 80% of my business, and when they closed down the platform, it meant that I had a void calendar. Uh, I was very, very close of closing down the business because there was just nothing there. I couldn't pay the rents. Um, Very fortunately, I had very good relationships with the landlords. I managed to pivot that business to management, and that's how I managed to survive. But obviously, with every problem, there's an opportunity, and that was the opportunity I learned was to go towards direct bookings. That had to be the lifeline of, that had to be the blood of the business. And transitioning to that, I think every business needs to have that stability. They can't build the business on someone else's land. They've got to be able to have access to their own direct bookings and be able to tap into that at will. So, leveraging places like Google, um, direct booking sites, any social media platforms, building a list of prior customers, guests, retargeting them, and that's one of the areas. But you've really got to narrow down what market you're serving. So whether that's the leisure market, whether that's corporate clients, whether that's contractors or theatre guests, hospital, um, and then reach out to that network. Um, and once you do that enough, you'll get word of mouth. You'll start getting people call you. I still, even though I don't really manage that much anymore, I still have a lot of contacts that will contact me, and I pass on all of those bookings now. In the Manchester area, I still get contacts from all over the country asking, have you got anything in Nottingham? Have you got things in Liverpool? And I think that's just the power of digging the well before you're thirsty. So you've really got to put in that work now, to be able to benefit from it later.
Yeah. Yeah, good advice, and it's so important, isn't it, to be laser clear on who your target market is, right at the start, because even the kind of properties that you're going to go out and, either source on rent to rent or take on as management, who are you niching in? Because once you know that, then you can start putting all of your time and energy into that market, and becoming the go-to person. That's a
Yeah,
really, really, really good point. And so many people don't do that. It's just the scattergun approach, whoever books, and then they turn up and they leave, and that's it. But, when they arrive, or once you've got contact, you should be asking, especially if they're contractors, who are you? Why are you here? What's the job site? What's the company? Have you got any other projects going on? and
Yeah.
start gathering all of that knowledge, to try and boost the future bookings from that company. So yeah, really, really good advice. I'd like to ask you something else, Tommy, and get your opinion on it. What do you think about people who want to get into the space, but maybe they're a little bit wary, I believe, rightfully so, about the rent to rent model and the future of it, and the costs involved with getting started in that business? Realistically, 5, 8, more like 10,000 to get anything worthwhile off the ground, with all the furniture and all the rest of it, and the deposits and the rents and the referencing costs and marketing, etc., etc. And they're thinking, I'm a pretty systemized person. I like processes. I think I can learn about this business without necessarily having to do rent to rent myself. And they just want to go straight into the management business of running SA. What's your thoughts
Uh,
around that?
I
With the
think the
right
advice,
education.
yeah, I think the advice on that is obviously the education, because if you're not doing rent to rent to start with, which is where most people start, then you don't get the knowledge and you haven't got the experience. So it's unlikely you're going to be able to pull off a good result for the landlords. You haven't got enough time in the game. And with the amount of management companies and all of these people that try their hand at rent to rent and then think actually it's not working, and then they try their hand at management, it really gives management a poor name, because a lot of these are genuinely just failed rent to renters. Um, I think my advice would be to partner with someone or work for someone that is successful. So if you have a local manager in the area, um, work with them. They may see it as competition, but I think there's plenty to go around in this business in management, because each manager you could probably manage probably up to 20 units at peak before you start losing your time too much.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so and 20 is a reasonable amount of units. It's going to give you a good amount of income. Um, and I think if everyone kind of looks at 20 as being like the average unit per manager, there's so much work to go around.
Yeah.
And if you train someone else up to be a manager, if you ever step away from that area, you've got someone else to fall back on. You can say, can you manage my units for 2 weeks while I go on holiday, and vice versa. And you can do favors, share bookings, share resources, share cleaners. Um, lots of synergy by collaborating with other operators or managers. I think
Yeah.
I think that's the way to go, is to shadow someone, work for free or work for low cost or work for a profit split or something like that.
Yeah. I mean, I think that I personally think that you can do it, or we believe that you can do it, with the right education and being able to do things the right way.
Yeah,
Because also the bar for management companies is so low, because the majority of management companies, they're not doing any marketing. They are just sitting on the OTAs. They don't really know what to do above that. And maybe partly to do with what you just said, that maybe they are mostly just failed rent-to-renters themselves and they've gone into management. So that's lacking. The communications dog shit from most management companies. There's no reports being given.
yeah,
And really they just don't care, because this is the thing with management companies. If you don't rent the property, it doesn't really affect you. You're not paying the rent. You're not paying the bills. It just means that maybe you don't get paid, but that's really as bad as it gets. So, there's a lot of management companies that really just don't put in the effort. If they get a big booking on Airbnb, great. They make some money. If they don't, who cares? So if you can teach someone or show someone the right way to do it and the ethical way to do it, with the right reporting, communicating, putting in the work, putting in the effort to get that property booked, I think
absolutely.
immediately, even if you haven't done 5 years of rent to rent before, I think you're already kind of beating most of the management companies out there.
Yeah, yeah,
So
yeah. Comes
So
back to
yeah,
core values. So if you've got good
it
core
does.
values and you want to bring the results, and that's very important to you, then you'll do well.
Yeah.
And even better if you've got guidance. If you've got guidance from someone that's knowledgeable, like yourself, if you're teaching people how to do this, they're off to a flying start. There's a huge gap in the market. The reason why I self-managed for so many years is because there wasn't any competent managers around. There was just so many management companies, but no one really that could really deliver the goods and provide that service level. The market's changed now. There's a lot of more experienced managers, but when I started, there was none.
How do you see the future of the market, Tommy? How do you see the future of service accommodation? A lot of people are out there on the group saying, it's all over, Airbnb's over, regulation, saturation. What's your thoughts around it?
Uh, I think there's a very bright future for service accommodation for the people that know how to do it. If you understand where the ball's going, really. Um, I think it is probably going to move away more from the sharing economy. So the more singular units. I think with legislation and regulation coming in, it's probably going to wipe out in some cities 60-70% of the current stock. But it does mean that the remaining ones, if they're operating all above board, they've got fire safety, they've got consents, they're on the right mortgage products, it's going to be a massive opportunity because the gate's going to close behind these properties. You're going to essentially grandfather rights yourself in, and you'll benefit from that. The barrier to entry is going to remain very high to get into afterwards. So anyone that's in, it's like Article 4 areas, and in some areas, where it's Article 4, existing HMOs will retain their value. Even if they're very run down, even if they need a lot of refurb work, there's still going to be some intrinsic value left there. I think that's going to be the case for service accommodation. But moving forwards, it's probably going to be a bigger players game. It's probably more going to be towards specifically built, purpose-built properties, like even small blocks that are purpose-built for service accommodation. I think that's probably where it's going to be headed. So there'll be a small market of single lets properties, large houses that can run service accommodation, but the rest of it's going to be purpose-built.
Yeah, completely agree. I see it also going down the Article 4 road as well. But it just comes back to exactly what you just said. As more it's the same, all the different property strategies, it happens across the board. Some think's the kind of sexy thing for a while because it's easy and unregulated. And then, when it becomes that strategy's turn to go under the magnifying glass by the government, regulations come in, people drop off, they go to the next thing. But the people who stick around and educate themselves, they benefit from that regulation. So I think it's a good thing. And I think most people who are serious think it's a good thing because it's going to weed out the faff. So yeah, I think it's good, and we'll see what the future brings. But yeah, Tommy, it's been some really good stuff in there, and I think anyone which I think there are so many of people who have got small SA businesses that really aren't enjoying it, making any money. They're probably doing 10 times the work that they were in their job, and now
Yeah.
they've created like a bit of a nightmare for themselves with a lot of stress, a lot of money going out each month, a lot of responsibility with these rents that maybe aren't necessarily doing as well as they should be, and they're probably missing out on lots of benefits, like you've said. I would absolutely recommend them getting in touch with someone like you and just doing basically like a full audit of the business, right? And sitting down and just breaking it all down and just rebuilding it back up in the right way, and that can change things overnight. So I think what you're doing is an invaluable service, and I would recommend anybody to get in touch with you because you obviously know your stuff. And go and check out Tommy on Facebook, and we'll put all of your information in the show notes, and you can see the depth of Tommy's answers in the various groups are head and shoulders above everybody else's when it comes to the technical stuff. And that's the difference. There's so many people that think that they know it all. And most of what they write in these groups is incorrect. Or, quick little one-liners just to maintain their visibility, but there's not really any real, structure or substance to their content. So yeah, really, really good stuff. It's good to have people like you out there in these groups bringing such value. So thanks for that. One last thing, Tommy, that I'd like to ask everybody that comes on the podcast is asking you to be a little vulnerable, maybe a little open. It's coming back to mental health, which I'm a big advocate for. I've had my issues, most people have, and I think that in this space, property as well, there's a lot of a lot of people that struggle. It's a very lonely place. You're working by yourself a lot of the time, comparing yourself on social media to people that seemingly have got it all wrapped up, and you're sitting in your little home office trying to make ends meet. And it can be hard. It can be dark. So how are you? How's your day-to-day mental health, happiness, fulfillment? Is life good?
It's good. I mean, it's all about perspective, I think, and life always throws things at you, and it depends on what you want to do with it. Life can throw you lemons, and you can be sour about it, or you can make lemonade. So I think there's always going to be ups and downs, and it's not all rosy. So people might see my social media and they think, oh, it's great, but I've had a really tough 2 years, since I left the service accommodation industry, and the reason why I had to leave it so quickly was because my wife had a very difficult pregnancy. I had to be there to support a lot. Even for the birth, it was very difficult. Our daughter wasn't feeding when she was born. She had tongue tie. The NHS was saying it's going to be a 6-week wait in order to be able to do the operation to basically cut a little bit of skin underneath the tongue so that she could feed. It was ridiculous. So we got a private operation done next day. As soon as we left the hospital, we got the private operation done within an hour. But that meant that she wasn't able to feed properly until that point. So it was probably at 6 days where she wasn't feeding. She was losing weight. Very stressful for both, for us both as new parents. And then just the adjustment period. I don't know if if you're a parent, but all the parents out there, when you have a child, and before you have a child, you're on like 8 hours of sleep a day. Sometimes I had the luxury of like 9 hours of sleep, but you generally have unbroken sleep, and from going from 8 hours sleep to 2 to 3 hours sleep at a time, it was just a massive shock to the system. And I wasn't really able to, and neither me or my wife were able to really recover from that for quite a long time. Putting the baby to sleep. I mean, fortunately, she's running about now. She's sleeping through the night most of the time. Life is a lot smoother, but it's not been an easy journey. And I don't think I've had, we've definitely not had the worst ride out of it. There is definitely people that are suffering much more and have a much harder time, but obviously subjectively it felt very difficult for us. And now just getting back into the service accommodation side and getting back into work and doing more kind of work hours, it's nice to be able to have some time away from family, but also nice to be able to have that time to spend with family as well. So there's always pros and cons to both sides. There are some days, obviously, it's more difficult than others. Sometimes you plan something and everything goes out the window, but you just have to deal with it, I guess, and that builds resilience. And you have to be very resilient in the service accommodation business. You're dealing with fires every day, and the quicker you detach the emotional side from it and just look at it, what is the problem and how do I solve it, and how do I solve this in the quickest way, the quicker you can move on. And it is a lot easier said than done. Like you said, a lot of entrepreneurs new business owners, it's a very lonely journey, because majority of the people we speak to are not business people. They don't understand the hardships of this business. They don't understand business in general. So there's very few people, probably less than 1% of the population that you can really talk to. Like, my whole network of friends aren't generally business people. So, my network now is pretty much all service accommodation and business owners. The whole circle of friends changed over this journey.
Yeah. Yeah. Great answer. I guess what I took from that is, you know, sounds like your family's obviously a huge part, and it makes it all worthwhile, right? When you have the hard days at work, or everything that you're going through kind of all makes it worthwhile when you come back to your family. But it's everybody's struggling. Everybody's got the ups and downs. And I just like to ask, all my guests that, because it is easy to look and think that, everybody's doing so well. And yes, there are people that are doing really well, but they've come through a huge amount of adversity to get there. For nobody finds it easy, overnight. So yeah, appreciate you being honest there.
Yeah.
Tommy, we've kind of time's escaping us here, but there's been so much good information in there, and yeah, it's obvious that you're so knowledgeable about the business and the service accommodation space. And like I said before, I'd urge anybody who's got questions, who's unsure about the business, who's not where they want to be, or heading in the direction that they want to go in, or they need some gaps filling in around the knowledge of how to run a business rates, fire regs, and all that kind of stuff that doesn't get discussed in the courses. All of those little bits that are just a little bit too complicated to go into, so they just kind of brush it to the side. Reach out to Tommy, and he'll be able to help you supercharge your business. So Tommy, we're going to put all your information in the show notes, so people can reach out to you. Any last bits finishing up that you'd like to add?
Just touching on that last point, I think because entrepreneurship is such a lonely area, just reach out, make it out to networking events, speak to other property investors in your area, other operators, and share knowledge. I think collaboration and support is really what helps a lot of people grow. Some of the best connections I made was on training courses and networking events, just through passing conversation. And I'm sure, this relationship, now we've built it, is going to continue, and we'll stay in touch beyond the interview.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'd completely, really, really good point. If you are struggling, if you are feeling alone, if you are, in a bit of a dark place, get the hell out the house, get to your networking events, get to the meetups, the coffee meets. They're all over the internet, all over the property groups. So just search your local area and get out and be around other people and make it a little bit more of a social experience. Because, man, it is, I know personally, like, it kills me just like sitting at home, like in front of a computer. I need to be out around other people, and it just makes everything a little bit easier. So really, really great place to finish up, Tommy. And thanks so much for coming on the podcast, mate. Really, really appreciate it. And everybody at home, reach out to Tommy if you need help with your business, and he'll take you to the next level. Until next week, thanks so much for listening and watching the Airbnb and Nomads podcast. And we'll see you next week for another fantastic episode. Until then, take care. Goodbye.